All right, so there's one additional thing we need to worry about when we're completing the square, and that is the pattern of adding like half the b term and squaring it at the end fails to work if the x squared coefficient is anything other than 1. And so as you see in both of these problems, we have x squared coefficients that are not 1. So before you start the process of completing the square, there's sort of a 0th step. And that step is to make sure your x squared coefficient is 1. Now, there's a couple of different ways of doing this. We're going to do this by dividing everything by that coefficient. So first thing I'm going to do, we'll solve this problem on the left. So I need to divide everything by 2 because the x squared coefficient isn't 1 yet. So when I do that, I get this. Now the process is going to proceed exactly as the previous example. Move the constant to the other side. I'm going to complete the square by adding a blank to this side and filling it with half the b squared. But of course, to keep my equation balanced, I have to do the same thing to the other side. I'm going to factor the perfect square trinomial, which in this case is going to be x minus 1 quantity squared. And on the right-hand side, that's going to be 9 halves plus negative 1 squared, which is plus 1. That's 9 halves plus 2 over 2, so that's 11 over 2. And then I'm ready to actually go through and take the square root. The square root of x minus 1 quantity squared is x minus 1, as long as I put a plus or minus on the other side. And then the square root of 11 over 2, that's the square root of 11 over the square root of 2. But we don't want to leave a square root on the bottom, so I'm going to multiply the top and bottom by square root of 2. That leaves the top as the square root of 22, and the bottom is the square root of 4, which is now 2. So now I can move the negative 1 to the other side. And I could leave it like that, or if I wanted to, I could write this as 2 over 2 plus or minus the square root of 22 over 2. That allows me to combine it into one fraction. Like that. This is the exact answer, and I would simplify the square root of 22 if I could, but it's 2 times 11, so I can't do anything with that. Now, if I look at this other side where I'm solving it, trying to write it in vertex form, again, I have to get the x squared coefficient to be 1. So in this case, I'm going to have to divide everything by negative 2. That includes the y. And again, the process is going to be the same as it was in the last example. Move the constant to the other side. Whoops. I'm going to complete the square. Now, this one's going to come out as a fraction because 3 is not a nice, pretty even number, but I take half of that negative 3 and I square it. And again, I'm going to leave it like that. I'm not going to multiply it out because it'll make it easier to factor. But in order to keep the equation balanced, I need to add the same thing to both sides. Now I'm going to factor the perfect square trinomial. And let's see. If I had multiplied this out, I would have to be thinking about, what are 2 numbers that multiply to give me 9/4 and that to give me negative 3, and that would be really hard to think of. If I leave it in this form, though, it's easy to factor. It's just x, and then the number that was inside the square goes here. So it turns out the negative 3 halves is the number that you need to multiply by itself to get 9/4 and add to get negative 3. Now, on the left-hand side, we've got that y over negative 2. And then we've got negative 5 halves plus 9/4. So let's see, that would be negative 10/4 plus 9/4, which is minus 1/4. And now I need to get the y by itself. Well, this is going to be a 2-step process. I'm going to add 1/4 to both sides. And then I'm going to multiply everything by negative 2. Now when I do that, we're just going to come down to the y on this side. The negative 2 times that quantity squared, it can't get inside the parentheses because the square is still there. So what it's going to do is just sit out in front, as you would expect an a value to do. And then we have to multiply negative 2 by this 1/4 over here. So negative 2 times 1/4 is negative 2/4, which is negative 1/2. So this would be the vertex form of that parabola. Be facing downwards. Vertex will be 3/2 comma negative 1/2, and you proceed to go from there. So don't forget, whenever you're completing the square, the x squared coefficient has to be 1 before you start. So we start by getting rid of that x squared coefficient before we do anything else.